I have my master's degree in public health from the George Washington University. And for the past couple of years, I've been working in public health, both as an epidemiologist and also as a data analyst at the federal level and also the state level. So before we get started, I want us to take a second and reflect on a couple of these questions here on the slide. I'm going to read them out loud, but the point of these questions is to kind of get a little glimpse of your data literacy level. It's not a full assessment, but just so we can kind of think about it and get the brain going. Okay, so how often do you confront data on a day-to-day basis? How comfortable and confident do you feel interpreting data when you come across it? Think about the last time you saw a chart. Were you able to identify the X and Y axes or even what type of chart it was? And thinking about that same chart, were you able to describe the relationship between those data points? Okay, so as you guys keep those questions in mind as we go through the presentation, I do want to start off with showing you this video. It's about a minute long. And this video is something that I recently came across on Instagram, and I think it is a very good example to think about why data literacy is important.
Make sure we clarify that with people.
Okay. So now I just want to take a second. Feel free to come off audio and just tell me, and you can share with everyone or even put it in the chat box of what kind of message did you get after watching this minute-long video? And what do you think the creator was trying to convey to us? Yep, you can go ahead and come off mute if you want.
Obviously, for me, I saw the numbers decreasing as far as the efficacy. So I think this person was trying to cast doubt on the efficacy of the vaccine.
Thank you, Dom. Jonathan is saying that the effectiveness of the vaccine is decreasing. Okay, so along the same lines. Great. So I would say that when I first looked at this, yeah, maybe that is something that I definitely would have thought of. But for me, when I looked at that video, my epidemiology brain juices just started going into overdrive. For me, a couple of things that I asked first was, well, what are they trying to tell me? To me, I just see that it's a series of headlines to like some really great orchestra music. But just based off of looking that alone, and I don't know the intentions of the creator, but I'm also making the assumption that they too want me to believe that the vaccine efficacy is going down. But I also know, and just using my experience and things that I've learned working with data over time, that looking at that video isn't enough for me to make a conclusion about the efficacy. For a couple of reasons. So what I want to know is, what are the data sources? Are these data sources that I can actually trust? Where's the data coming from? Are all the articles talking about the same things? We know that we have several vaccines that are on the market. Are these articles all looking at the same vaccine? Are they all looking at the same populations, the same countries? Another thing that I was asking, well, what time periods are these articles from? And just with looking at the video, I can't tell any of that. So I would definitely have to do some more digging. But this is just an example of really putting into practice some data literacy skills when you see these type of things in your everyday life or even in the news. Oops, okay. So what is data literacy exactly? I've seen several definitions of data literacy depending on the organization or the data practitioner, but data literacy can simply be defined as the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. So the goal of data literacy is to have the skills and confidence to do things in data. So this would include confidently understanding data visualizations or using data to communicate ideas and develop strategies and game plans. Another major goal of data literacy is the ability to use data effectively to draw insights. So why is data literacy important? Data literacy is important for several reasons. For one, data is a part of our everyday lives. Our world is full of data, and whether we come to realize it or not, we're constantly using data in our everyday lives to make decisions. From looking at our bank statements to following our fitness trackers on our Fitbits or our Apple Watches, to tracking, the money that we're losing in our stocks and in our Robinhood account. So all the time we are constantly viewing data and using it to make decisions. And businesses are also using data in a variety of ways. Besides us using data in our personal lives, companies are also collecting and tracking, monitoring, and analyzing data through products and platforms in order to guide their strategic planning and also sustain their businesses. Having data-skilled employees is essential to bringing value to businesses. So knowing how to understand and to use data is important for all organizations and all companies. And at this point, data skills are essential for almost every role in every organization. And even on an individual level, just strengthening your data literacy knowledge and skills also has the potential to improve your marketability, because having data skills truly is a need right now. So where does the gap lie? Data literacy isn't something that we're trained to learn in school. Not many of us received formal training on how to use technology and the data that's available today. And even when I look back at my data literacy journey before I even knew what data literacy was, I was able to strengthen my skills in working with data and communicating data throughout work and in school. But a lot of people don't share the same experience. A significant skills gap also exists. So in a study done by the Data Literacy Project, they found that 76% of key business decision makers are not confident in their data literacy skills. And only 24% of the workforce across the globe is fully confident in their skills with reading, working with, analyzing, and communicating data. And that's pretty low, especially when we think about how companies are moving towards really relying on data for all of their decision making, that poor data literacy skills are really going to hold businesses back. As technology changes, job responsibilities are also changing. So technology hasn't impacted every profession in the same way, but we're seeing that many roles who maybe never had to work with data in their job are now finding that working with data is an essential part of their job function. Okay, so now that we know what data literacy is, why it's important, let's get into it. We're going to do a deeper dive into the 4 skills and concept of data literacy. So thank you, Miss Tabitha Brown. Okay. So the first skill is having the ability to read data. This means having the ability to look at, comprehend, understand, and make sense of data. Reading data can be something like reading bar charts or tables, even understanding percentages when they're presented, and knowing what they represent. I also think that reading data is also the ability to recognize patterns, like seeing if there is a rise or fall among the data points. So the next time that you're presented with data, some of the things to consider are whether you feel comfortable with finding chart titles and visuals and identifying data sources, so you ultimately know where the data is coming from. If the data is presented visually, take a look at the scale so you can see what units they are using for measuring. Also do simple things like finding legends and understanding the axes. So we are going to take a look at this example. This is a visual from a CNN article, and I just want us to take a minute and practice actually reading this chart. So don't focus so much on trying to interpret it, and like take something away, but really just look at it, get an understanding of like what's going on here. What are they showing us? What's the time period for, and all that stuff. So if we just take a look again here, and you're welcome to put into the chat, you're welcome to come off of mute, but let's just throw out some things and practice reading this chart. So what are some things that we would consider when we're presented with something like this?
So for me, just kind of looking at this, one thing I would be considering is what is the population of North and South Korea as well as North Dakota and the proportion of it? Because obviously, now again, I can't think of the population of any of those three off the top of my head, but I would imagine if one has a one has a kind of a smaller populate, have a much larger population and a larger number of deaths, that would also be accumulated to the fact that it has a larger population. So someone else can probably also add on to that as well.
No, that's good, Jared. Thank you for that. And I also think it is important. So for one, what Jared did was he noticed that there were colors going on in the chart. But then he was able to look at the legend and see what those colors were actually representing. And he saw that they're comparing to US states to a country. So that's good to think about comparing populations, and good to think about, like you said, the size of those populations. Like, are they truly comparable? Sia also mentioned the time scale seems arbitrary, maybe every 8 weeks. Yep, I would definitely agree with that as well. When I first looked at this and I looked at the x-axis, I did see that they were in months, but I noticed that they weren't in 1 month intervals, which I thought was interesting. It goes from like 1 month to 2 months to 1 month. So I thought that was strange, but that is something that I noticed. And then Deidre, you agree with Sia, the time interval appears to be inconsistent. Yes, 100%. So I would agree with all of those things. So like I said, when I looked at this, I first looked at the x-axis, which is on the bottom, going horizontal, and I can see that it is showing a time frame. And then also, it probably says it in the news article, but what is on the y-axis? I'm sorry. Well, those are the total confirmed deaths. But also just noting the y-axis, and that is going on an interval of, it looks like every 200. So just some practice to get a hang on actually reading a chart. And when you're presented with something like this, that you know what to look for, you can decipher things. Maybe not interpret things yet, but just get familiar with really navigating it. Yep, I agree, Bobby. So maybe it says it in the news article, but just looking at it, we can't tell if it's 200,000 or if it's 200. So the second literacy skill is the ability to work with data. So working with data can encompass finding, collecting data, accessing data, navigating, and also managing it. A couple of examples of working with data would include navigating a dashboard or an interactive map to change its views. So are you comfortable with if it's a dashboard and there's maybe like a point and click or some drop down menus, are you comfortable to navigate that dashboard and actually get it to a view to what you want it to look like? So that could also mean that you're maybe excluding certain groups and you want to just retain some. So some things to consider. Consider your comfort with accessing data. Can you find the places where you can pull data from? Do you feel comfortable downloading or exporting and importing data into another tool? So just for example, when I'm in my bank account, I have the option of downloading my bank statement into like a CSV file. And what I like to do is then import that CSV file into Excel. And that just helps me with reviewing my finances for the month. Also, knowing how to find your way around a data set. So take a look at the column header names and values in each cell. Do you know like when it's appropriate to either add or remove columns? It's also good to be able to recognize data types that are being presented. So basically, there are two data types that exist. You have your quantitative data, which are things that can be measured and they answer the what. But then you also have your qualitative data, like text responses that are typically open-ended responses to open-ended questions, and they help answer the why. So even just knowing the type of data that is being presented would be an example of working with data. So I do not have an example here on the chart because I couldn't think of how to visualize, someone working with data. But I do want to touch on a personal experience that I have. So one of my first clients was interested in growing her podcast audience. She knew that there was data available that she could potentially use, but just needed some help on thinking through that process and what she can actually do with it. So I was able to help her understand the data that's currently available. In this case, that was listener data on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And what she was able to do was then walk away with knowing how to download listener data from these platforms. She also had an understanding of how to import data into Google Sheets and build some basic pivot tables to summarize the data. And then she was also able to customize her final data set. Instead of relying on the visualizations that the platform provided, she was able to really make the data set into what she needed. She was able to identify that, they're not covering everything that she's interested in. So how do I add on and add some additional variables to really build out a data set that was helpful for her? So the third literacy skill is analyzing data. Even if you're not the one to do data analysis, it is still good to have an understanding of how it's done. So MIT describes the skill as the ability to conduct analytic tasks and being able to filter, sort, aggregate, and compare data. So some examples of analyzing data would be manipulating data through filtering by removing rows. So say if you're working with a data set that has maybe multiple countries in it, but you're only interested in working with maybe Western countries. So are you able to filter that data and remove rows to only include information that you're interested in? Another example is sorting the data. So for instance, sorting the data to be ascending order by name or descending order by age. You may also have to merge multiple data sets together. And with that, you might do it in a programming language like R, which is really powerful. But then also comparing results across time or between groups. So for example, like comparing luxury car sales in 2021 compared to 2022, but then additionally doing it by car type. So having that ability to compare different groups and across time and even places. So I retrieved this table from, it was called mill.prostarter.org, and it depicts a cross-tabulation analysis. You might also hear cross-tabulation being called a contingency table, but basically what it is, it's a really nice analysis, you know, just something basic, but that visualizes the frequency of total responses and also breaks it down to subgroups in a table. So in this example, this data person analyzed the frequency of types of responses. So the responses were from strongly agree to disagree across all responses, and then broke it down by household category. So there are two household categories. You have your large households and then your small households. With this, we're able to see the distribution of the responses across the household groups. So the fourth literacy skill is having the ability to argue with data. When you argue with data, you are interpreting and communicating data appropriately and effectively. When communicating data, you want to consider your audience as well. For example, you really wouldn't create the same presentation that you would for, say, you know, executives that you would do for this. You would do the same thing for data scientists, mostly because the need is different. Executives are obviously making decisions about operations in the business, but the data scientists, you know, they're the ones that are going to be dealing more with like the modeling, and they're more of the data heavy, data oriented employees. So being able to communicate the same data in different ways to different audiences is also a skill of data literacy. You're also going to use data to back up your ideas or actions. And arguing with data can also mean the need to do a deeper dive. So when you're presented with data, you're doing a deeper dive and you're kind of arguing against the data. So when I think about this, it's I immediately think of not taking something at face value, but instead I'm asking further questions, maybe around the demographics or maybe around the time. But what I'm interested in is just doing like a deeper dive and seeing if I can identify any gaps, maybe things that weren't clarified that would need to be clarified. So it just helps me with asking some additional analyses questions. So we're going to go back to our example of the coronavirus chart. And we're going to do another practice. This time we're going to practice on interpreting this chart. So think about some key takeaways from looking at this chart. What kind of insights are you able to make from it? And do you see that there are like any other additional analyses that you might want to do or that you might be interested in just based off of what we have here? So again, you're welcome to come off mute. Also welcome to throw some things in chat. So Wayne said South Korea has had a constant rate of loss of life. Yeah, feel free to come off mute.
Really not seeing when this data started being collected. It's almost at an arbitrary point.
Yep. Agreed. Okay. Well, thank you guys for that. So when I look at this chart, a couple of ways that I think it could be interpreted is that, you know, from April 18th to November 17th, the total confirmed deaths for South Korea rose. It was a pretty steady a pretty steady climb between April 18th and November 17th. And then when we compare it to South Dakota and North Dakota, we see that South Korea had a sharp increase in the total number of deaths at about April 18th. But North Dakota and South Dakota, they had a sharp increase at the September 25th time period. So just a way to practice thinking about some key takeaways and interpreting which you see based off of the data that's presented. So now that we walked through the 4 skills of data literacy, what can you do to strengthen your data literacy skills, and what can you start, doing now? We'll get into the technical skills after this, but even just thinking about the soft skills involved in data literacy, which includes communicating and even bringing others into your data conversations, is also important. So for one, you can start to change the way you think about data. So I personally encourage you to start thinking about the ways that data are a part of your everyday life, and how you use it to make decisions. So you can start increasing your awareness around ways that data are also accessible to you and how you use it personally. And also remember, I haven't said this, but you do not have to be a math whiz or a statistician or a data scientist to build data literacy skills. It's literally for everyone, and everyone can benefit from it. So start thinking about data that you readily have available right now, and then how you can leverage that data to help you decide what you want to do next. You can also start to look for data that actually matters to you. So look at data on your Apple Fitness goals. You can look at trends that you've had over the last month. Also think about, that reading goal that you set at the beginning of the new year in 2021, and how are you making strides towards that goal? Think about the number of pages that you have been reading over the week or over the month, and how, are you getting closer to that goal based off of the data that you have already available to you. Say that you recently started a business and you're gaining some traction. You may want to start thinking about the leads that you're gaining and how fast you're gaining leads. Look over the past month or the past few months to see how really gaining leads has been changing. You also want to practice looking beyond face value when you're presented with data. So this point, again, resonates with me when I think about all of the coronavirus headlines in the news, and even things on social media. Because the reality of it is that sometimes data and reports or visualizations can be really misleading, and you really do want to practice just judging what's being presented to you. So again, you want to be sure to identify where the data source is from, what time is it from, is it still relevant to you today? Also think about, what people or subjects is the data being reported on. And the list can go on and on, but you just want to start practice getting comfortable with really confronting data and not taking things at face value. You'll also want to learn some technical skills that'll help you on your journey. And again, you don't need to be a math whiz, but just knowing some basic concepts around data and some basic math or stat concepts can be really helpful. So for one, get familiar with some basic data and statistical concepts, like practicing identifying qualitative and quantitative data, and then also things like understanding what a mean, median, and mode are. These are just basic things, but it's really helpful when you are looking at these visualizations or these reports, and if they're describing these types of numbers, you can have an understanding what they mean. Feel free to also start working with data in Excel. So of course, as technology grows and skill sets grow, we start to use different tools. But the reality is Excel is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. Companies still use it. And I think it's a really great place to start practicing how to navigate spreadsheets, and also just building pivot tables and creating simple charts in Excel, I think can go a long way. You can also start learning some more advanced skills. So for instance, learning a programming language like R can be really helpful when you have to start manipulating and analyzing larger amounts of data. It just can really streamline your processes and your automation. And then, you might not be there yet, but when you get there, you can get into these more advanced skills. And then another possibility is just create your own project. So come up with some questions that you're interested in investigating, and find your data sources and come up with your analysis plan, and even, practice communicating your findings to a friend or family or a coworker. So what I'm doing to help others, I work with business leaders and guide them on how to ask the right questions based off of their organizational goals. I teach clients how to leverage data that already exists in their companies, so things that are already available to them, and help them to identify gaps. I also consult on analytic projects and provide guidance on analyses. I really enjoy educating and training. So I enjoy training data-inspired people how to program in R and even build visualizations and things like Tableau or Excel. And also bringing people up and helping to nurture a more data-driven culture, and helping to change the idea that working with data is scary, or it can be overwhelming. So really encouraging others that this is something that is open to everyone, and just empowering them with that confidence to get their journey started. So that ends our session together today. I want to say thank you everyone for joining me, and a special thank you to Black Tides for organizing this event. It was such an opportunity, a great opportunity to hold this session. So now we can open it for some questions.
Looks like you have one from Leonard.
Any recommendations for projects to work on that I could feature on my resume for it? Yeah. So my suggestion for you is to even look at some public data sets that are available. So I work in public health, so I feel more familiar with like data from the federal government that's available, but there are public use data sets that, thank you, Andrea. So data.gov, you can download a data set from there, depending on, what it's about. And then just come up with maybe 5 questions that you want to answer based off of that data set that's available. And then from there, come up with your analysis plan. So what methods are you going to use? Are you going to clean the data? What program are you going to use? And then also think about the type of visualizations that you will want to create. I think definitely creating those visualizations are a great thing, or are some great things to showcase in your portfolio as you're creating, as you're like developing your portfolio with the more practice that you get. And then I would also recommend, when you do have your data visualizations, to even create like a small slide deck, so you can really practice on communicating, everything that you did. You can communicate how you identify your data sources, the methodology that you did, your questions, and then you could just have a slide deck that has your visualizations, and it makes it really easy to share. So Carla, in public health, do you work a lot with SAS, or is SQL and Python preferred? Or should I be familiar with all three? So I would say that in public health, especially working at the state level, and maybe the federal, but they definitely primarily use SAS. And what I've seen is that a lot of healthcare professions look for SAS users. But I think it depends on what you're interested in. I think if you're interested in maybe getting more in the industry, or maybe getting more into like a data science role, that I would recommend learning R or Python, just because I think that definitely opens up your market to a lot of positions that are outside of public health. But I will say that state agencies definitely, they want SAS users. Melissa, is it Melissa? Do you recommend any tools or best practices that help you keep your work organized? So for me, I like to keep my work organized. It depends what I'm doing. So working in R, there is this thing called R Markdown, which makes it really helpful to where you can just organize and write. You can like organize and comment on all the script that you're using. And I would also say that I enjoy working with our studio because I'm able to create like a package or a project, I'm sorry. And within that project, I can have like several scripts within that same project. So for me, that does help me keep my R script organized, especially if it's a project that I will use again, or that I have to go back to a lot. So I would say our studio. And I know that there are a couple of other tools that could help keep you organized. And I would have to look at some other examples, but I would say that doing like my scripting in R it's definitely good practice to use an R studio project. Sometimes when doing a lot of data analysis, it can get messy, quick, and confusing on how to keep everything neat, organized easily. Yep. Yeah, I think it definitely takes practice, and it definitely makes it harder, like when you're collaborating. And I think even collaborating in like this remote world with others, some good things to use is like GitHub for sharing script and even tracking the progress of projects. So I think it just takes some trial and error to figure out what works for you. Thank you, Erica. Steve, definitely SAS, but Python would be beneficial for your development. Yep. So is it Ugochi? Can you describe a project or assignment you have been tasked with as a data analyst in public health? Sure. So before my state job, I worked with a federal agency, and they did primarily global HIV work. And a project that I did in that job was helping countries to develop dashboards and automate their processes with the program data that they had available. So this would include helping them to identify the questions and metrics that they were interested in having in their dashboard. And then also creating a script in R that would manipulate the data and get it into an accessible, finalized data set that would then be imported into the dashboard. So these were both Tableau and Excel dashboards. But the program data was, it was already there. Every now and then there were other data sets that they were interested in merging in. So again, just doing the data scripting to clean and manipulate the data, and getting it into a data set that could be imported into Tableau. And then a big thing as well was automation, because they will be reporting out on a quarterly basis. So just making sure that we can limit as much as the manual labor as possible, so we can automate it just on a quarterly basis. Well, I don't. Oops. So Brian asked, and Andrea, how are we doing on, oh, we have like 3 minutes. Okay, so Brian asked, with so many tools and languages and data that can change from time to time, do you recommend specializing in a select few or have a general sense of a large subset? So I would say that some of the things that you do want to focus on, especially if you're getting into analysis, one would be to learn SQL. SQL is a major database language that I constantly see in job descriptions. Like I don't think I've ever seen a data analyst job description without asking for SQL. I would also suggest learning a language, learning either Python or R. I think typically what I've seen is that the company is asking for one or the other. And then I just went the R route because that's something that was available to me in grad school. So I just took advantage of learning R and SAS in grad school. But I would say that my preferred language now is R. And then lastly, to learn a BI tool, so how to develop visualizations and reports in a BI tool. I would say that Tableau is definitely a major one. And Tableau is not free, but they do have a free version. It's called Tableau Public. And with that, I think the only caveat is that all of your data is pushed to the public. So you don't want to put any, private, confidential information in your dashboard. But that is a free public version. And Andrea is also saying it's free for students as well. But I would say SQL, Python or R, and learning a BI tool like Tableau. I think we only have time for one last question. So from Bobby, what are some best practices or resources, tools to better understand how to differentiate good data from bad data? I think that is a good question. And I would say that best practices with differentiating between both is kind of really practicing looking into like the data sources, and I think looking more into data. So I think the more that you engage and interact with data, you get a sense of what is good data quality and what is maybe bad data quality, especially if I'm thinking about, a data set that has a lot of missing values. If there's like a lot of missing values, then, you can't take too much away from that. So you do want to be careful with using data like that. And then I think it's also important to understand like the company or the organization and how they're collecting their data, because data collection is a huge thing that can influence your data quality. So for instance, say if you're working with partners and they're supposed to be submitting data to you, so you're collecting data, but maybe they're not reporting every month, or they're not reporting whenever they're supposed to. So again, it goes back to you're just having large amounts of missing data because you just can't get your partners to report to you. So I think the more that you engage with data, the better idea that you have about and around data quality. So I think that is our time today. I want to say thank you everyone so much for joining me, and please feel free to get in touch with me. I put my email, my Instagram, and my LinkedIn on the slide. So yeah, so thank you everyone so much, and enjoy the rest of your night.